Let's greet everybody here who's with the Save Our Schools Coalition. I want to ask everybody behind me and to the side if for a moment we could take a moment of silence and we could focus our attention for just a moment. Because I have a sneaky suspicion that you all are not just here in this heat for a vacation. But we are gathered here today as we the people are unified in a common cause drawn by God's spirit of love and truth and justice. We're gathered here in the tradition of those who have worked throughout history to heal a divided nation. We're gathered here because we still believe in one nation, one dream. We take seriously that pledge and prayer that we should be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're here for every student like this young man and these young men. And if there's some young sisters, if you would come. I never speak at a podium alone. I think that we have to be careful not to give the picture that it's about anyone. So if there are any other young people, come on up and join us today, because ultimately saving our schools is about saving our children. And we come here today and we're in the backdrop of our being here is Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated by hate and injustice. So I can't come here today and act like things are okay in America. I can't come here today without first speaking to the cries and the mourning and the death in our nation. Before I could finish weeping about Baton Rouge, where Alton Sterling was killed first by 2 bullets at point blank range as he laid on the ground. Then less than a day later in Minnesota, from the deepest part south to the deepest height in the north, Minnesota, where Philando Castile was killed. And both were killed by what I call black bodies, bullets, badges, gone bad. Another episode. And then just the night before, President Obama pleaded with us as a nation to do better, called us to reach higher. And across this nation, from Dallas to DC, peaceful protesters, black, white, Latino, Asian, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, young and old, gay and straight, came together saying that Black Lives Matter, came together in a nonviolent solidarity to grieve and protest police brutality. And then in the midst of that, a killer or killers struck and hijacked the peaceful protest and used the protest as a staging ground to kill and target police who were actually watching over our children and families. We're doing the right thing. Shots rang out. Some say 50 to 60, who knows? And so now in less than 72 hours, 5 shots in Baton Rouge, 4 shots in Minnesota, 50 or 60 shots in Dallas. What do we have? 2 lives, 2 souls of black men dead, 5 lives, 5 souls of police persons dead, many wounded, 2 fathers, 2 sons, 2 brothers, just trying to make it, were killed by those who are supposed to protect and serve. 5 officers, 5 public servants, 5 members of families were killed while they were trying to protect and serve. The sounds of bullets and the pictures of death and violence are right before us, right in our face. All over social media, we see hate and violence, not love and humanity, terrorism and fear. And if we're going to be honest with our humanity and honest what it means to be a human, whether it's the violence perpetrated by police terror, by those who misuse the badge, or whether it's violence and terror against those who wear the badge and are doing their sworn duty rightfully, it's wrong. And more violence will simply beget more violence. One was killed selling CDs, one while he was trying to comply with the law, and 5 were killed trying to uphold and protect the law and the people's civil rights. 2 black men wrongfully and brutally killed by police. Now 2 black police chiefs having to protect the city and try to console families of police who were wrongfully and violently shot down. Each shot was heard around the world. And each shot inflicted more wounds in our nation's soul. What we're dealing with now, my friends, is Shakespearean. This tragedy of the nth degree is forcing us to have to wrestle with who we are. Yeah. This is violence and death gone wild. And in this moment, we must mourn for those killed and the families left behind. In this moment, we must denounce violence and embrace nonviolence, because violence cannot lead us forward. In this moment, we must deal with the complexity. We cannot hide from it. We must, yes, deal with the reality of police brutality and shootings and wrongful death of far too many black and brown and poor people, and the data-driven truth about racial disparity in the criminal justice system. Yeah. We can't push it under the rug. We can't deny it. We have to have federal protections. We have to have federal funded body cameras on every police. It shouldn't be whether the state wants to do it. We have to have intense screening of anyone hired to be a police person on the front end. Because we can only give the badge and the gun and the power of the state of those who meet the highest standard and have the highest regard for all human beings, regardless of race, creed, class, or sexuality. And we must have, when there is police brutality and death, we must have real trials and real convictions and real consequences for wrongful police killings. But not only that, in this moment, we must also honor all the officers of the law that do serve and that do protect and that do love the community and who every day try to do the right thing and protect our families. And it is possible to be outraged by both deaths. The first person that called me about the deaths in Minnesota and Baton Rouge was a retired police officer. In fact, he's my chief of security. The first person to call me when the police were killed was that same retired police officer. He was outraged about both. And if you're a true human being, you are outraged at the death of anybody. In this moment, we must address homegrown terror. And America cannot act as though violence is new. America has a deep violent history. The day that the Brown decision came down, on May 17, 1954, riots broke out all over this country. 1 year later, Emmett Till was killed in retaliation to the Brown decision. Yes, we've had killings recently in Orlando, terrible, but we also have to remember Tulsa in the 1940s, when hundreds of African Americans were killed. We must decide in this country that we're going to deal with our history of violence. And in this moment, we must address homegrown terror. The terror right among us. The terror that blew up people in Oklahoma, remember? And we must deal with the proliferation of guns. Remember that in Dallas last night, a person could be carrying an assault weapon, fully loaded, and could have walked right down the street past the police. We don't even know if the snipers walked past the police and could carry those guns, because in Texas it's open carry. What are we doing? As a nation, we've got to deal with our gun laws. From Dallas to Orlando, look at what can happen if we just have more guns. We must ban these assault weapons. We put ourselves, our police, and our children at risk. And the moral call now is to establish justice, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the domestic tranquility, the moral and religious values of love and justice and mercy. These must be the North Stars that now guide us forward. Not partisan politics, where somebody tries to use this blood to bolster their political campaign. We don't need any more hateful political rhetoric and policies that turn us against one another. We surely don't need to offer more guns as a solution. The police had many guns. Guns are not the solution. They couldn't even eventually stop the killer. They had to send a robot in. So everybody having more guns is not the solution. We can't deny racism, and we can't have a disdain for all police. And surely we can't believe that violence is the final answer. In this moment, where the nation as a whole has on the ashcloths of mourning, and while death is staring us in the face, blood is streaming from the ground, blood is crying from the ground, crying from the asphalt, crying from inside of a car, where we can see inhumanity up close, we must choose to do better. We must choose to be more human. We must choose to be more loving and more just. And even if we can't fix it all, even if we can't stop all the violence and stop all the killing, if the world is broken that bad and we can't fix it all, our children should at least see us trying to fix it. We have to challenge the very culture of violence. That brings me to today. Coretta Scott King said some words that I carry with me, George, everywhere I go. Where's Bob? George. And I carry those words not long after her husband was hunted and killed and shot down by a system of racism and hatred and killed by a sniper who shot him with a deer rifle. Somebody asked her, Miss King, tell us your opinion on violence. And she said, surely that kind of violence is violence. She said, but poverty can produce a deadly kind of violence. She said, in this society, violence against poor people. She said, starving a child is violence. Suppressing a culture is violence. Neglecting school children and undermining education is violence. Discrimination against working people and not giving them a living wage is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical needs is violence. Contempt for equality is violence. And then she said, even a lack of willpower and a refusal to try to help humanity is a sick and sinister form of violence. We as our nation here, we've got to choose not to be on the side of violence by trying to do better. And part of that means that we must stand strong in our time. When black men were being lynched at one a day, the founding of the NAACP, for instance, they didn't turn to violence even though they protested the violence. When Rosa Parks saw the killers of Emmett Till acquitted, she was hurt, she was angry, but she didn't get more violent, she got stronger. They shot at her, they bombed her house, but she took on Jim Crow and she won. And we must do that today. We must be on the side of nonviolence by making a fresh commitment to justice. And part of what that means for all of you here is we must have a fresh commitment to fight for public education. You would turn this up just a little bit for me. Here we are standing here, and one article says, poor black and Hispanic children are becoming increasingly isolated from their white affluent peers in the nation's public schools. According to the new federal data, the number of high poverty schools serving primarily black and brown students has more than doubled between 2001 and 2014. 62 years to the day after the Supreme Court decided that segregated schools are inherently unequal and therefore unconstitutional. The proportion of schools segregated by race and class, where more than 75% of the children receive free and reduced price lunch, and more than 75% of black and Hispanic has climbed from 9% to 16%. And resegregation doesn't just hurt black children, it hurts all children. High poverty schools hurts all children. And 40 years of educational research tells us that isolating students in high poverty schools creates dangerous pools of misery. That's a form of violence. Creates failure that can sink a school system. And you know what's really troubling as I move toward a conclusion? This kind of violence, we can stop it. We know what to do in this nation if we wanted economic justice. The issue is, do we have the will to do it? Do we have the moral capacity to do it? Or will we just get on the left side and the right side and the Democratic side and Republican side? Well, when is somebody going to get on the right side, the moral center? If we want to build our, save our schools, we know what to do. Stop resegregation and promote diversity. We want to save our schools, secure equity in funding for all schools. If we want to save our schools, stop attacking our teachers and respect our teachers and pay our teachers. If we want to save our schools, we need smaller class sizes. If we want to save our schools, we need to focus on math and science and history and reading. If we want to save our schools, we need to promote parental and community involvement. And if we want to save our schools, we must eliminate inequities in suspensions and graduation rates and performance. And so I hope that you come to this conference to commit to say that in this time, I'm going to be on the side of nonviolence, which means, as those of you who are part of this coalition, you will use every means of direct action, legal and political, in the street and in the suites, to fight that every child has a right to a constitutional, diverse, high-quality, well-funded public education. We believe that all children of America deserve the best schools in the world. Am I right? Yes. All of them, red, yellow, black, or white, are precious in God's sight. We know that attacks on teachers and attacks on public education is constitutionally inconsistent. It does not fit the moral parameters of establishing justice and providing for the promoting the general welfare. We know it's economically insane to attack teachers and to undermine and underfund schools, because our economy depends on the quality of our education. And anytime we invest more in prisons than we do in schools, that is ridiculous. That is insane. Even President Eisenhower once said that funding schools properly was a matter of national security. But beyond the constitutional and the economic reasons, ultimately this is a moral issue. There is a notion in our nation of e pluribus unum, building one out of the many. There's another notion in our society, one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Our greatest religious traditions, whether it be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, our greatest religious traditions tell us that our children are gifts, and that children must be welcomed and cared for if a nation is going to be great, and if a nation is going to honor God. When you undermine the dreams of the children, you undermine the dreams of the nation. That is why 2,600 years ago, the Jewish rabbis will tell you that Isaiah stood up to the nation in Isaiah 10 and said, "Woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the children of their rights and rob the poor of their rights." There's something immoral about leaders in D.C. and leaders in our state houses around the country that will focus more on finding emails than funding education. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong and immoral when they're working harder to get people guns than they are to ensure people get a good education. There's something wrong when you're more worried about tax cuts for the wealthy than you are about full funding for the schools. There's something immoral when you're working to deny and suppress the vote rather than to open up the opportunity for every child to be educated. There's something wrong with that kind of agenda. It's immoral. And there's something at stake, you all, as you gather on this mall There's something at stake beyond just the state of our schools. It's the very state of our society. The question before this nation is, do we want to keep pressing toward a just, wholesome society, or do we want to go backwards? I believe on this day, here in the mall, this historic mall, somebody wants what God wants. Everybody, red, yellow, black, or white, taken care of. True community. More togetherness, not more separateness. And we can't turn back now. It was too hard to win the things that we've won so far. Our fathers and mothers prayed, and too much. There was too much sacrifice and blood and tears shed to open up public education, and we can't turn around now. We are trying to head toward a better society. And so we must believe in a place where no one will have a need. In a place where, regardless of where you are or who you are seen as special and worthy of God's attention. We must fight for true community and true education. And together we must say, forward together, not one step back. Forward together. Until there is no such thing as your school and my school. Forward together. Until the beloved community is a reality for all people. Forward together. Until every child reaches their fullest potential. Forward together. Until we stand together and make America true to all of its promises. Forward together. So as you go on the Capitol Hill, as you go into your conference, as you move around this nation, let us stand together. Let us love together. Let us call for justice together. Let us walk together. Let us believe together. Let us provide for our children together. And let us declare that backwards is a place we cannot go. We are determined forward together and not one step back. God bless you and stand strong.